Mr. Chair. I call Stuart Nash.
Mr. Chair, I'd like to agree with my colleague Grant Robinson. I've come to the House to speak on the bill that went through a select committee, and as Grant said, the Finance and Expenditure Select Committee, by and large, and I was on it in my first term, and I'm on it again. We get some contentious bills, but how it works is we work very closely together to come up with consensus. Very, very rarely, in my experience, do we disagree on anything or put a minority report in, because a lot of work goes into this because we understand how important they are. But we also understand, Mr. Chair, that the chair of the FEC is under directions from the Minister of Finance. Of course we know this. It's the reality of the situation. So again, it is a most peculiar situation that the chair, who is no doubt in the chair of the FEC, Finance and Expenditure Select Committee, who is no doubt in direct communication with the Minister of Finance on a regular basis in terms of the work of the committee and the bills before the committee, wouldn't have discussed this. So I'm not too sure where this has come from, and I suspect the minister and the chair has no idea either, because he's not a finance minister at all. I was going to be rude, but no, I won't go there. Maybe Mr. Bishop does know this because he was in the office. But let's get back to the purpose of this. And he wrote a lot of this. You probably wrote this, didn't you, Mr. Bishop? You know the reason behind this. In fact, I have no doubt that Mr. Bishop said to Mr. English, "This is how it should be done, Bill," wink, nod, and it was done. That's how it works, isn't it, mate? Well done. But you know what? When you finish ordering those hair straightners. Yeah, exactly. What he said, and the thing I don't quite understand about this is that there will be a reason behind this. There will be a reason behind why the Minister of Finance has said that he does not want to have ministerial approval, as was set out in this. And I'm not too sure if it's because he thinks there may be some sort of liability or conflict, as Mr. Robinson has pointed out, and as we all know about the super fund. One of the fundamental principles behind it is that it was politically neutral. So we didn't want to have any political interference, and I suspect that is why it has run so well. In fact, it's just a shame that the contributions haven't been back into it, because its rate of return has been astounding since the GFC. We're only about 18%, if I'm not wrong. But the reason why this piece of legislation, which is reasonably technical, I suppose, in nature, is before the House is because the Guardians were in a situation where they effectively controlled an asset, but they didn't have control of the business entity. And it's always been part of the rationale of the fund, I believe, is that if it can invest in New Zealand assets, so be it. And that's a good way. It's a way to boost our capital markets and actually control ownership of a lot of investments. And in fact, they have invested widely in this country. I think they own Z, Kaingaroa. But part of the reason for this, Mr. Chair, is they effectively didn't have control of the business entity itself. And where I would like to see some of this being exercised, for example, is we are selling a lot of our farmland, our sensitive New Zealand assets offshore. If the superannuation fund, if there's a good business model where the superannuation fund could actually justify the purchase of that, I think that is a preferable option. In fact, Mr. Chair, there's been since 2005, when the Overseas Investment Act came into play, there's been over 1,000 consents for the purchase just of sensitive land that have been granted. And it would be good if the super fund was actually an investor in here, as opposed to the Americans, the Canadians, the Chinese, the Austrian, and everyone else. But yeah, as has been said, I'm not too sure of the reason behind this SOP or the reason behind the changes. We really do need the Minister down here to explain these, because it is a fundamental change in the way this whole thing is done, Mr. Chair, and it would be good to know. But back to the purpose of the bill, I don't think anyone doubts the veracity and the competence behind the Guardians and the job they have done. In fact, it's been fantastic, and part of the reason for that is because there has been, I was going to say part of the reason for that is because there has been no political interference. In fact, that is not one of the reasons. It's because they're incredibly competent and they do a magic job of doing it. But we all acknowledge that they cannot have any political interference except in very, very specific circumstances, which is what this bill was actually trying to put into place. But we also recognise that there were some instances where they did actually need to have a measure of control over the operating entity that they were buying into, and this was to do with the governance arrangements. And in this day and age, when when there's a lot more focus on governance arrangements.
I call David Bennett.